All right, welcome back to part 3. You made it. Fantastic. Thank you so much for sticking with me with these 3 videos. I hope you've got something out of them, and I hope this one is by no means an exception. My name is Steve, composer, engineer, and lecturer, and welcome back to the channel. So, what are we doing? We're taking a look at how to create some custom graphics inside Kontakt. Essentially, these help give you a little bit of a unique edge to your instrument, help you express yourself, as well as what controls you actually want to use. It's both utility and a little flavor of creativity as well. So, as I mentioned, this is part 3. If you've missed part 1 or part 2, take a look at some links above and I'll be able to share what we did in the first 2 videos. Essentially, video 1 took a look at how to create some graphics and what graphics we actually needed for our Kontakt instruments. Backgrounds, knobs, sliders, faders, that sort of thing. And part 2 took a look at how to get those into Kontakt so that we can now, for part 3, script them into our instrument. I'm taking a look at my instrument Mellowsaw, which is available on the wonderful Piano Book community, pianobook.co.uk. Check it out. There is now over 800 sample instruments free for you to download and use in any song that you want, as well as it being an active community that genuinely wants to share, grow, and develop in sampling. A fantastic place to break into this environment, get some feedback on your instruments, and, share what we all love doing. If you do want to check out Mellowsaw, I'll leave a link above, but otherwise, let's get stuck into it. So where we left off before, I basically had created a small little instrument and loaded some files into it. Rather than going through the process and manually typing it out and you having to watch me do that, I thought what I would actually do is dive into the Mellowsaw instrument so you can see this in action. In the script for Mellowsaw, in the version that you can download from Piano Book, I've been very deliberate with comments throughout the script so you can understand what section is for what, and hopefully kind of decode it a little bit so that you can kind of use it as a learning resource and dive in and see how some of these things are done. I'm always learning as well. I'm always diving into the script editor, learning new things and trying out different things. There are some fantastic courses out there to be able to check out this sort of thing, and I'm going to be sharing as much as I can along the way as well. So do subscribe if you want to see more of that. Lovely little videos about scripting. Who could not want that? All right, so essentially what I've got is Mellowsaw open up, ready to go. If I just played something, hear a wonderful chord there. It's that kind of analog inspired synthy goodness that we all love from sort of 80s sci-fi movies, Blade Runner, that sort of thing. There are a lot of controls in here and I've mapped them all out. If you want to have a look at this from Mellowsaw yourself, just dive into the spanner and open up the script editor. You'll see this weird sort of like image here. This is because it's created the background and it's trying to pinpoint everything. One weird thing I might mention now is I'm using Kontakt 6, which can go to 1000 pixel wide GUI. The interesting thing is when you start going beyond the 540 or 700 or something that Kontakt 5 could go to, it starts to drop off and you no longer see the other bit. I don't know why that is. It sort of seems like in the spanner section, they've kept Kontakt 6 the same as Kontakt 5, which is good, but they've allowed no kind of like scroll over, which I find a little bit strange. My own personal feedback there to Kontakt. Now, if you scroll down a little bit, you'll come to the code editor or the script editor, and you can scroll through this and see all my lines of scripting that I've done for each thing. I've divided it into sort of 3 main sections. The top section is the on init section, and this is where I'm setting the background, which we're going to take a look at, declaring all of the knobs and setting their images and sliders and all that sort of fun jazz. And then the next section below is where I start to assign functions to things. So here is the on UI control. When I move one of these sliders or knobs or switches, it needs to do something. So that is an important section there. There is also an on controller section. I am using some MIDI CC channels to control some of the parameters, mainly the texture box in particular. Basically so I can use my MIDI CC controls to blend between tape effect and non-tape effect, between the 2 brassy and more stringy type textures of Mellowsaw. Because there's an on controller element, basically when I move that controller, I need it to do something to the GUI, and that is essentially what that section is for. You can see here I've commented everything. So this little sort of parentheses and dashes section here, they are all just comments. They're not doing anything to the script. They're purely there so that basically for my own benefit as much as yours, but I really wanted to be able to describe what's going on so you could see what's happening. The very first thing I want to take a look at is creating the GUI, or the performance view as they call it. The performance view is basically the window that we see. If I scroll up, jump back into my spanner and take a look at this window, this is the performance view. So when we create a performance view like this, we're creating something that we can see where we don't have to go to the back end and try and change things up. Going back into the spanner again, jumping down here, you can see I've got an on init section. This starts an on init block. I will mention as well, if you are unfamiliar with coding, I have created a video, I'll link above, where I demoed how I set up some of my coding in Metallurgic Alchemy, another library I've done previously and shared on Piano Book. That also has some great comments in it as well, where you can dive into the script editor and take a look. By all means, please do. But that video may help you out, understand what an on init block is, what an on UI controller is, and what an on controller is. So those blocks are going to be the fundamental of how I've coded things. So do take a look at that video and check out what I mean. It uses the MIDI CC controllers to help kind of speed up your coding a little bit. It might be something that you'd be interested in. All right, so I've got my on init block, which ends with an end on, as all callbacks in Kontakt do. So I've jumped in here, I've got make underscore perf view that creates the performance view. I've set the script title, this title up here, to performance view. Not really something you need to do, but I've done it anyway. And I've also set the UI width and height to 1000 pixels and 642 height. So 1000 pixels wide and 642 high. That's the dimensions of my background that I created. It's important to note that I've got underscore px or pixels there, and that's because I'm defining as pixels. Kontakt does have two different systems. It has the pixel system and then a grid system. A grid system is not very precise, and as soon as you do anything in pixels, you can no longer do anything in grid. So it's worth bearing that in mind. I've typed in a little message so that when it starts, a little message appears at the bottom saying, welcome to Melosaur. And then I've set the control underscore par underscore string, and this is where I am setting my background so that when I go in and have a look at Melosaur, it has a nice pretty background that I can start putting controls onto. What this basically is I'm using basically a callback or a control or a prompt. I'm then saying the dollar symbol and then inst underscore wallpaper underscore ID. And then I'm putting in this $ control underscore par underscore picture. These are separated by commas as well. And then in quotations, the name of my background image. Now this is important. If you haven't seen part 2 of this video series, you might want to jump back now and work out what the resource container is and how that kind of works. But essentially, after you've set up your resource container and you've uploaded all of these pictures to your resource container, you will have an available background image. That will be named in a particular way, so make sure you pop the exact name in there. You don't need the .png or the .txt, you just need the name of those files. Kontakt will look after the rest. Once you've set that in there and you've used that function there, your background will be ready to go. Now, it really is worth mentioning at this point that pretty much, unless you are really into scripting and really into computer language, this is not something you're going to memorize or ever be very fluent in. Definitely there are people who are, and I really, hats off to those people who are. I find it just doesn't really stay in my mind. I go from one instrument to another going, what did I do again? I can't quite remember. So when you see me say, oh, just do this, or I just quickly type that, that's not me going, oh, from memory because I know it all. It's me consulting a guide often. That guide is my lifeline. There are forums out there that can help with these sorts of conversations. You can watch lots of videos on YouTube. I'm hoping to have quite a few of them up here soon. That way you can get familiar with the essentials and the kind of environment and fill in the blanks later with these guides. You are not expected to know every single Kontakt command and input line and function and callback, or even what all these things are called. The best thing that you can do is just become familiar with the environment and have an idea of what it might need, and then go searching through the guide later to find out the specifics and find out how to exactly line up everything. At the end of the day, scripting is a language, and if you're going to become fluent at that language, it's going to take a lot of time and effort. You can use that language a little bit with some translators, some help from Kontakt's sampling guide. Here you can see, as I scroll through the Kontakt KSP reference manual, it has everything in here. It's quite detailed. It is both detailed and brief sometimes, in the sense that a lot of the time it will tell you exactly what to do, but it may not explain exactly what each little thing is. So you might find yourself diving between different sections, kind of piecing it together yourself. That's where also forums and usually videos can so often help as well. So if you want to know exactly how to do something, or you're wanting to change something slightly, jump into the KSP manual and become really familiar with that. It's a fantastic resource. I'd recommend saving it to your computer. Okay, so we have our background in there. Now let's take a look at one of the knobs. Okay, so as I scroll through this scripting, you'll see a number of boxes, and these boxes are actually referring to these specific boxes. So you'll see a texture box, an LPF box, a SAT box, all that sort of stuff. So as you scroll through and you see these comments that say LPF box, that's what it's actually talking about. It's just my little way of being able to identify and kind of subdivide things so I can quickly skim through the code later, usually as I'm trying to fix bugs. There is a cutoff knob filter, which if I'm remembering correctly, I think is this one just sitting here. Essentially what I need to do is declare that knob, attach a sort of value and a range and parameters and that sort of stuff to the knob, and then set my image to it. If you're just looking for the code and you want to kind of grab that and pop it in and start manipulating it in your instrument, pause this screen now and take a look at this. This will be a great starting point for you. This is also, I should mention, how I do it and how I format it. Things might look a little bit different in other people's libraries. Some people may have approached it in different ways. That is a wonderful thing about language in general, which scripting is no different. There are many ways of saying things and we all arrive then at the same conclusion. Okay, so the first thing I've done is I've declared a UI slider. Wait, what? Slider? Yes, UI slider. Even though it's a knob, I'm declaring a slider. And that is because if you declare a UI underscore knob, it won't be able to accept the image that we want to attach to it. So everything responds as a slider. So if you're wanting a slider or a knob, you will need to still have them both set to UI underscore slider. I've then created the $ LPF underscore cut. That's me labeling it, giving my declared element, my slider, a name. And I've set my parameters. It can go between 0 and 1 million. Those are the two sort of bordered bookends in Kontakt 6. It is a little bit different for other contacts, so jump in and find out for yours with the KSP manual. But in this case, 0 to 1 million are my boundaries. The reason I've got sort of 5,000, I think it's there, 5,000, 50,000 set there, is because this particular cutoff filter, I don't want it to go all the way to 0 hertz. I don't want that control to go all the way down. I only want it to go down to like, I don't know, like, I think it was 100 hertz or something around about there. So basically I've limited the range of that knob on the bottom end so that it wouldn't go all the way to 0 and cut off my sound entirely. I would still end up with a little bit of sound at the bottom. So that's just me playing around with the parameters so that the knob sort of responds in the way that I'm looking for. It's important that those are in brackets and you've got the minimum versus maximum values in there. Also what I've done here is I've just declared another random label or title, and then I've set that variable to the UI ID for the cutoff filter. The reason I've done that is just to make my coding a little bit simpler down here. Otherwise you have to kind of insert a function within a function, and I'm not a huge fan of that. So basically I create a separate declared variable and make that whatever the ID is for this knob that I've created. It's one of those little funny things with Kontakt and with scripting and computer language. If you make a declared variable, you're giving it a title, which is the LPF underscore cut, but that's not its specific ID. There is an ID attached to it. So that's what this ID variable is going to then return, the specific Kontakt ID, what it's labeled it behind the scenes. The make underscore persistent function there is just to make sure that every time I load up my logic session that I might be composing in, all of the parameters once saved are going to load back up in the right way. They're going to stay at a set interval. This is to make sure that if I change something, I don't end up with all these values all over the place when I reload that session, because then I've lost the sound that I was going for. That would suck. All right. So then we move into this section. So I've got move underscore control underscore px working in pixels. I'm moving the control to a specific location. That's me placing it on the border. If I didn't do this, it would just stick it at the top left. I don't want to do that. I obviously want it in a particular location. So it is, left to right first. So I've set it, I've obviously targeted the cutoff filter knob, and then I've set the left to right value, so 300 pixels along, so the top left corner will line up that 300 pixel mark, and then how high it is, so 322 pixels, the top left corner will be sitting there. So it's sort of creating a grid point that knob will snap to. The top left corner is where it's registering it. Now, if you're using a graphic design program and you've placed all these items and you have a mock-up of what you want the interface to look like, there's a little bit of a hack. You can just click on the item in your graphic design program and take a look where it's positioned pixels. Make sure that it's snapped to the top left corner and take a look and see where that is positioned on the X and Y scale. Then just simply put those values in here. Job done. The set control path string is setting the particular image. So here I'm doing very similar sort of thing to the background. I'm using the same sort of element and I'm just basically putting this graphic of a knob to the knobs function. I've got the LPF cut ID. So rather than me having to do a get UI ID function, I can just pull that variable in, stick it in there, and then complete the rest of the function from there. It makes it a little bit easier. You might now be seeing why that variable is there. Then I put control par picture and in quotation ms_knob, the title of the image that I have titled that knob value for. The other one below here is that because I've had to use a UI slider, and because when Native Instruments puts a slider in its interface using its own one, it scrolls from left to right or horizontally, I have to change the mouse behavior so that I don't have to drag my knob left and right. I can drag it up and down and have it respond. That's important. So what I'm doing instead is I'm setting a control par, again using the UI ID variable that I created, control par mouse behavior, and I'm setting it to -1000. Basically, this changes it to an up and down pattern instead. Without that there, I would have to drag left and right to make this move, and that's not really ideal. That's not how we tend to use knobs when we're using a mouse and a keyboard. So I've set it that way to make sure it's more familiar. All right, so then you just copy and paste that and do that for everything, for all the knobs. Sounds kind of funny saying that for all the knobs, but that you know what I mean. Now let's take a look at a slider. I've obviously got some sliders here for my ADSR. Essentially, it's very much the same thing. I'm declaring a UI slider just like I was for the knob. I'm giving it all the same sort of variables, and I'm defining it by the same things. I'm creating a UI ID variable. I'm making persistent. I'm setting the control, setting the image, and setting the mouse behavior. These are all very much the same thing as what I just did for the knob. So it's copy and paste. The only thing that's different is it's calling up a different image, MS Fader 2. That's what I named my fader. So I've brought it in and here it is. That's given me 4 faders in this ADSR box here. Nice and simple, same straightforward thing. The one that's a little bit different, of course, is the switch. I've got a number of switches here for my options box. So let me jump down to my options box. So for my buttons or switches, I've done very much the same thing, except this time I'm declaring a UI_button. You can see that there. I've still set it as a variable name. I've given that variable a value of 1, which basically means it's on to begin with. Whenever this instrument loads up, I want it to start in the on position. 0 would be the off position if you prefer it that way. I've declared an ID, got the UI ID. I've also set some text, and that's to do just with sort of labels down here. And I've made persistent so that if I turn something on or off, and next time I load it up, it will be the same. Then the pixel movement, just the same as the knobs and slider before, and the set control path string, pretty much the same as before, setting the picture this time to ms_switch, just my way of labeling the button that I'm using. Remembering obviously from part 2's video, if you haven't watched that, check it out, but the button has 6 different animations: an off on when pressed or clicked on, and an off on when the mouse is hovering over it. Because I don't really want the mouse to interact or change the image in any way, I've simply set it up so that the on off are the same 3 images each time. So I've set a velocity switch and a limiter switch in the same way, so they're in there ready to go. Now, from there, you can attach whatever you like to it. If it was a low pass filter cutoff, for example, you might be attaching the frequency cutoff range to that. If it's a button or an on and off, you might be attaching the bypass switch for an effect to that. Whatever it might be, that would be in your on UI control section. I would just recommend it. Most of the time you're using a set engine par and this sort of equation here. Very much I recommend jumping into the KSP manual and checking out set engine par, what that does and how to kind of set it up, because depending on where your effect is or what you're targeting, these little values between the commas are all going to change. I'm not going to dive in today and take a look at all these different things. I will have videos in the future that will take a look at this, so make sure you subscribe for that. But for now, you've now attached the icon to it, And if you're at the stage where you're creating graphics or custom graphics for your instrument, you've probably got the rest of it down pat from here. Set up the instrument how you want it from here. You'll now, though, have your own knobs and sliders instead of the generic ones. So hopefully that brings a little bit of, I don't know, pizzazz or something to your instrument. A little bit of you and creativity embedded into the instrument sample that you've created. Well, thank you. If you have made it to the end of all 3 of these videos, a huge thank you to you. I'm really enjoying making these and I'm hoping to share a lot more in the future. I mentioned in one of the other parts as well that I'm creating a Kontakt 101 course, so make sure you're subscribed to hear some details of that when it comes out. It's going to be coming out in the first half of this year at some point. It's going to take you right from the very beginning of how to create or generate ideas to sample and how to sample those sounds, through to prepping up the sounds, getting you into Kontakt Sampler and scripting some controls for your UI. It's going to be a fundamental look at how to create everything from A to Z, a really kind of comprehensive look, hopefully, free on YouTube, so that everyone can take part in the piano book community and contribute something really cool and awesome to it. It's over 800 instruments already. It's wonderful to be a member of that community and contributing to it, and I really hope that you take the opportunity to do it as well. It's a really wonderful experience and really gratifying at the end after you can play your own instrument that you've created. It's not to be understated. That wonderful moment where you tap the keys and it just finally works, and it's really cool. Thank you again for reaching the end of this video. I hope you've enjoyed all 3 of these parts. I would love to hear in the comments if this has helped you, or a simple like to let me know I'm heading in the right direction. Subscribe for more as it comes out, but otherwise, for now, catch you next time.